Every night before bed, 6-year-old Emma would ask her dad, Ben, to read her a story from her favorite book. Ben would oblige, even though most nights he was exhausted from work and all he wanted to do was go to sleep. But he was a tired single dad trying his best. Reading his daughter a bedtime story seemed like the least he could do. One night, however, as Ben was reading Emma a particularly spooky story about a haunted house, she suddenly interrupted him. "Wait, I know what happens next," she said, her eyes wide with a strange sort of knowing. Startled, Ben stopped reading and looked at his daughter. "You do?" he asked, confused. Emma nodded excitedly. "Yeah," she said. "You keep reading, Daddy, please." So Ben continued the story. But Emma kept interrupting him, saying that she already knew what was going to happen next. Not only that, but she also started predicting things that hadn't happened yet. Things that would have been impossible for her to know unless she had already read the story before. Unnerved by this, Ben stopped reading and tucked Emma into bed. He didn't want to scare her, but her insistence that she already knew the story was starting to freak him out a little. Night after night, the same thing happened. And soon, it became their nightly routine. Every time Ben would start reading, Emma would start interrupting him with her eerie predictions. It was creepy, to say the least. Then one night, as Ben was reading, Emma suddenly went silent. She listened intently to the story for a moment, and when Ben finished the chapter, she finally spoke. "That was a good story," she said quietly. "Can I read it again, please?" Puzzled, Ben asked, "What do you mean? You want to read it again?" Emma nodded, and so Ben obliged. As he read, Emma listened intently, her eyes fixed on him. When he finished the story, she said, "That wasn't the ending." Confused, Ben stopped reading and looked at his daughter. "What do you mean?" he asked. Emma stood up from her bed and walked over to the bookshelf where the storybook was kept. She reached up and pulled the book off the shelf. "This is the ending," she said quietly, opening the book to a page that was filled with strange symbols and writings that Ben couldn't decipher. "You haven't read this part to me before," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why not?" Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. He tried to shake off the feeling, but as Emma started reading the strange symbols and writings in the book, couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The room suddenly felt colder, and the shadows seemed to grow longer and more menacing. Emma continued reading, her voice echoing in the silence of the room. In the end, the father was consumed by his own darkness, and the house burned to the ground, she said, her eyes fixed on the book. "No, that's not right," Ben whispered, suddenly feeling a sense of urgency. He realized that the story was somehow coming true, that his daughter was somehow involved in it. "It's not happening," he said, trying to convince himself. But as he watched his daughter, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The book slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor with a loud thud, making Emma jump and Ben recoil. The pages were filled with eerie drawings and cryptic messages that seemed to mock him. Emma looked up at her father, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Ben could respond, he heard a noise in the attic above them. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards. Ben and Emma looked at each other in terror. "I think we should go," Ben said, his voice barely a whisper. They ran out of the house and didn't stop running until they were far away. If you enjoyed this scary story, then be sure to check out the next one.